Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. For a business that only launched in 2008, Airbnb has had an extraordinary impact, covering much of the globe and disrupting the travel and accommodation industry. In that time, more than 2 billion, with a B, 2 billion people have stayed in Airbnb properties, with more than 15 million listings currently on the platform. And while I've used it plenty of times for holidays, it's also growing as an option for business travellers too. Susan Wheeldon is the Country Director, Australia, New Zealand and Oceania at Airbnb, and she joins me in the studio. Susan, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you for having me.
We've all used Airbnb, but just very quickly, how does Airbnb make money? How do the people with the properties make money?
Great question. Well, if you're looking for a fantastic holiday, it is the first place you come to. So effectively, we're like any other platform where we're introducing two sides. So the host obviously gets the money from the guest, and Airbnb takes a small fee for facilitating the service.
Okay. We've all used it for holidays. You are pushing into business. Tell me about that, because I would never consider Airbnb if I was actually travelling for business. I would always consider it travelling for leisure. So what's the plan? What's the strategy?
Well, there's two parts to it. Firstly is what we would call bleisure. So that is actually the mixing
Sorry, what's the word?
Bleisure.
Bleisure.
So business plus leisure.
Oh,
so the reality is...
Stretching it.
So the reality is if you're going away for 2 or 3 days and you want to stay on for the weekend, you book an Airbnb because it means you've got the Wi-Fi, you've got the office space, but you've also got the laundry and you've got the cooking facilities. So when you're staying for somewhere a bit longer, it just makes it a bit easier to stay. I think the other thing as well is we quite often think about business travel as being into capital cities. But the reality is if I'm a mechanical engineer and I'm needing it out near a mine for a period of time, the only option I have is going to be Airbnb. And if I'm traveling there frequently, week on, week off, whatever it may be, I want somewhere that's familiar to go to that I know. And so we find all of those use cases on the platform.
So what proportion of visitors or users of Airbnb are business travellers rather than pleasure travellers?
It's a really interesting one to break out, and it's an interesting one for us to try and understand what property to serve when they come to our platform to look. It is hard to actually distinguish who is travelling for either because we don't ask for that information. But what we do see is you can start to see patterns if people are travelling same place, same time. That tends to be it. And we see a lot of that for nurses, for example, who may be doing locum work with doctors. We can see those kind of travel cases coming through.
So those offering their places to business travellers for Airbnb, is there anything different that they need to be offering?
Well, the number one search for amenity in this space is Wi-Fi.
Yep.
So it needs to have a Wi-Fi, but not just any Wi-Fi, good Wi-Fi, because as you know, if you're working remotely, you really need to be able to access all of your Zoom calls and meetings. So that's the number one thing. Second thing is office space. So is there somewhere that I can sit and work that maybe is not the dining room table? And the third one quite often is actually people looking for things like car parking. So, if I'm driving somewhere, is there somewhere that's just easy to park and getting out to do the meetings?
On the Wi-Fi, so off air I mentioned to you that my partner Jack and I are thinking about actually spending time for 6 weeks overseas and doing the show from overseas. So to us, it's all about Wi-Fi. So I messaged the person that we're looking at renting, in fact we have rented it, and said, what's your Wi-Fi like? And she came back and said, well, no one's complained about it yet. So I'm hoping it'll be okay. My point being though, how do I know what's when I go to Airbnb and I use the app and it says Wi-Fi, how do I know whether it's any good or not?
Two ways of knowing that. In some countries, we actually provide the speed. So where available, we actually provide the speed of the Wi-Fi in that listing, and that has been independently tested. The other way is if you have a quick look at the reviews, that is the first thing someone will call out if it isn't going well. So that will be an easy way to work that out.
Yeah. Wish I'd done that before I'd spent all my money. Anyway, moving on. Airbnb, one of the great disruptors really of the last 20 years. Nowadays, traditional hotel chains are certainly using online much more. There are other online brokers out there who are incredibly competitive, one in particular. How does Airbnb, what's the next step for Airbnb just to stay ahead?
So interesting, last week we just actually announced our launch of experiences and services. And to the exact point, what we want to make sure is previously you chose Airbnb because of the amenities. So you wanted to be able to do that washing or the cooking, but you didn't necessarily have some of those hotel facilities. So you had to make a decision about whether this trip was more suited for a hotel or an Airbnb. We've just released services and experience. So actually now you can have the best of both worlds in an Airbnb. So if you want to have a private chef come, or if you want catered meals dropped off, you can now get that in an Airbnb. And then you can have all of those great experiences and live like a local, which is what Airbnb has always been about.
We might get into that in a moment. Stay with me, Susan. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Susan Weldon, Country Director, AU, New Zealand and Oceania at Airbnb. So I could get a chef. I think before we went to the break, you said you could almost, well, not anything, but you were saying, just tell me how that works. Presumably you have to be in a reasonably large metropolitan area. And what sorts of services can you potentially get? How does Airbnb do it? I'm interested in the business processes in that.
So these are all people who have been vetted and are qualified for outstanding service on the platform. And you are right, it does start in the capital cities, and then we'll see whether we expand, when we can expand from there. But that is everything from you can get a personal trainer, you can get a chef, but you can also get someone who can package pre-prepared meals. So if you just want some great healthy meals, but you don't need someone to prepare it for you. So a whole range of options that we're starting in Australia with. And then overseas, they've expanded that even further into other categories as well. So a really interesting way to see how Aussies love to travel, and the things that they've most searched for are things like meals and personal trainers when they're on a trip.
Why would you get a personal trainer when you're on a trip? That is beyond me. Maybe it's a business trip, so you feel like you should still be doing your PT classes.
Do you know what? I've done it before when I was on holidays because it's one of the only times I had time to do it.
Oh, Susan.
And then I thought, they can come to me. I don't have to find a gym or join a membership or sign up and give my information. And you know what? It was tailored to my very minimal fitness requirements.
That's pretty good. Okay. So let's look bigger picture here. One of the criticisms of Airbnb and other sort of property groups are the fact that housing supply at the moment is short, and, you know, is Airbnb doing the right thing by the rest of the economy in allowing people to rent out their places? What's your response to that?
Firstly, the housing crisis is absolutely a real thing, and it is very, very difficult for governments to deal with. So I understand why they're looking at every lever they can pull. I think the reality is the entire short-term stay market is less than 1% of the housing stock in Australia. And we know from Airbnb, 80% of our hosts only have one listing on the platform. So that means it's the home that they live in, or it's a family-owned holiday home, which is not or has never been on the long-term rental market. So for us, we really want to make sure that people understand actually what's happening on the platform. The reason why Airbnb is actually so good for the economy is that 73% of our hosts need the money they make from hosting to stay in their own home or to offset the rising cost of living. So people are actually using us to be able to afford the mortgage that has gone up several times, over the last 2 years. And then that money that they're earning, the majority of that money then goes back into that local community. So they're potentially paying a local cleaner, a local gardener, they're doing renovations on their home. So that's why it has such an incredible impact. And the last Oxford Economics report we had done on this, it was $13.6 billion that Airbnb guests put into the Australian economy in a single year.
Do you have much turnover of property owners?
We do, simply because if you're listing your house for 3 or 4 weeks a year while you go on holidays, you might be doing the great 6-week trip to the south of France and you list it, but next year you may not be doing the 6 weeks to the south of France. So we do see naturally people come on off the platform depending on what their travel plans are.
Okay. What about trust issues? So the worst thing that could possibly happen to you is get a bad review on Airbnb as a guest, right? And very difficult to overcome the fact that the kettle melted down because you left it on and you didn't mean to, but, etc.
Sounds like personal experience.
Yeah, very much so. How important, when we, Jackie and my partner, when we look for Airbnb, we only look at above a certain level. Does cost matter on that level? And how do you improve your Airbnb rating, I suppose, is where I'm going.
So that's a really interesting one. So you know how to use the platform, which is great. But for a first-time booker, they may not. So we actually released a product called Guest Favourite. And this is properties that have a star rating of above 4.8. But not only that, we also use AI to scrape the sentiment of the reviews. So we can understand what people have said as well as what star rating they've given them. And that's so that our new guests can find those really great properties and know the amazing ones to stay at. But all I can say is, as a guest or a host, you want to make sure you're doing the right thing, which we know that the majority of our hosts and guests are doing, and then you're sure to get that fab review.
You know that I clean up more at the Airbnb than I do in my own home. And I'm not joking. Like when we're leaving, I got kids cleaning the whole bit because I can't afford a nasty rating.
It sounds like you're never going to get one, which is great. But that's the joy of the review system is every review is authentic because that is a genuine stay, and it is someone's personal, review of that property, both from a host and a guest side. And that's what makes the trust in the platform, which is why it's been able to grow, is because people do trust that that property is what it says it's going to be. And from a host perspective, if I'm letting someone into my home, I want to make sure that that guest has got great reviews as well. So it's super important.
Finally, 5 years' time, Airbnb be in this region, where do you expect it to be playing?
Tell you where I'd love it to be playing. I would love for every Aussie, when they go away on a holiday, to think, I can get a co-host to host my property for me. I would be foolish if I don't have my house pay for my holiday when I go away.
Will you get there?
We're working on it.
Susan, thank you for joining Fear and Greed.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Susan Wheeldon, Country Director, Australia, New Zealand and Oceania at Airbnb. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.